At 4:33 p.m. on 15 September 2007, CCTV cameras at Southern Cross Station, 989 Spencer Street, Melbourne, recorded a man in a dark jacket entering the concourse carrying a small child. The station's security log notes his presence on camera 14, crossing the tiled floor toward the suburban platforms. At 4:35 p.m., he placed the child, later identified as 3-year-old Chen Pumpkin Xue, beside a row of fixed steel seats and walked away without looking back. At 5:28 p.m., a passenger informed staff of an unattended child, triggering an official Victoria Police CAD welfare entry. Officers arrived minutes later and documented a distressed toddler with no guardian in sight. What investigators did not yet know was that, across the Tasman, a body lay inside the boot of a car parked outside 14A Torbay Street, Mount Roskill, Auckland. Only later would the footage reveal the man leaving the station was Yin Xue, already fleeing a crime committed days earlier. On the morning of 11 September 2007, at approximately 9:12 a.m., a neighbor saw Xue loading several bags into his blue 1995 Honda Rafaga outside his home on Torbay Street. The witness later confirmed the observation in a police field interview logged at 19:04 on 16th of September. At the time, nothing appeared unusual. Xue was known as a traveling martial arts instructor who frequently moved between Auckland and international tournaments. But by 16th September, 6 days later, his wife Annie Lu had not been heard from in over 90 hours. His daughter had been abandoned in a foreign city, and authorities in 2 countries were attempting to piece together unrelated incidents that were, in fact, part of one timeline. Routine travel, routine silence, routine absence, all became significant once investigators connected the child in Melbourne with a missing woman in Auckland. What began with a welfare call would evolve into a transnational manhunt. At 8:47 a.m. on 11th of September 2007, weather records show a clear spring morning in Mount Roskill, the sunlight catching the narrow driveway of 4A Torbay Street. According to court documents later presented at trial, this was the last morning Annie Lu was seen alive. She had spoken with a friend the previous evening, confirming plans for the week. Nothing in those conversations suggested concern. At 9:12 a.m., neighbor S.K. Patel observed Xue placing luggage into the trunk of his Honda. Patel later stated in his formal interview with Detective Sergeant Steve Wood, he looked like he was preparing for travel. Nothing strange at the time. Annie was not seen leaving the house. Police would later reconstruct this moment using Patel's statement, bank transaction timestamps, and airport departure records, establishing the final window in which Annie was alive. What was seen as routine travel began the investigative baseline. Detectives would soon compare this neighborhood sighting with Xue's documented flight time, a comparison that would narrow the timeline of Annie's death to a matter of hours. Although the morning of 11th September appeared calm, police records showed prior strain. Between 2005 and 2007, officers had been called to the Torbay Street address multiple times for domestic dispute complaints. In March 2006, Annie sought temporary refuge at a women's shelter. Notes from that intake later became part of the evidentiary file. Despite these reports, no active protection order was in place by September 2007. Investigators later stated that while prior incidents could not predict homicide, they shaped early investigative assumptions once Annie could not be contacted. Witness accounts from Annie's co-workers at a local business on Dominion Road confirmed subtle concern. One colleague reported during a statement at Auckland Central Police Station, "She'd been quieter the past week." The observation carried little weight at the time, but would gain significance as investigators established a pattern of escalating tension in the household. prior documented conflict contextualized the growing urgency to locate Annie. These earlier reports warranted a welfare check rather than waiting for routine contact, a decision that would prove critical when officers finally accessed the property days later. By 12th of September, Annie's friends began noting unanswered messages. Telecom metadata later confirmed her phone had not moved beyond the Torbay Street cell tower since the morning of 11th September. A co-worker attempted to reach her at 10:41 a.m., logging the call in a later witness statement. It rang, but there was no voicemail. On 13th September, Annie missed a scheduled appointment. Her employer documented this absence in internal records later obtained under warrant. Meanwhile, airline data show that at 1:25 p.m. on 14th of September, Xue boarded Air New Zealand flight NZ103 to Melbourne, alone. At this stage, no one yet connected his sudden travel with Annie's absence. Cell tower data would eventually show that Annie's phone had remained stationary for 3 full days, never pinging off any tower beyond the immediate vicinity of the residence. The pattern suggested the phone had been left behind, or that its owner was no longer able to use it. Routine silence became the first objective sign that something was wrong. The disconnect between Xue's travel and Annie's disappearance would later anchor the homicide timeline, establishing the crucial hours between last contact and confirmed departure. At 4:33 p.m. on 15th of September, Southern Cross Station's CCTV captured Xue walking through the concourse with Pumpkin. The child wore a pink jumper, later logged as Exhibit PX00721. 2 minutes later, he placed her beside a metal bench, adjusting the small backpack she carried. At 5:28 p.m., station staff reported an unattended child, triggering a Victoria Police CAD entry. Siwasm Mevan 52104. Senior Constable Jessica Lynch arrived at 5:36 p.m. and initiated the standard child welfare protocol, securing the child, photographing identifying features, and searching the area for a guardian. Lynch later testified, "She couldn't tell us her name in English. She kept repeating, 'Daddy gone.'" The child was transported to Melbourne West Police Station for emergency care assessment. Standard procedure required cross-referencing recent international arrivals with children matching her age and description. Border agencies began matching flight manifests from the previous 48 hours, looking for entries listing adult males traveling with young girls. The identity of the child remained unknown, requiring international data checks. Border agencies began cross-matching recent arrivals traveling with young children, a process that would eventually connect Melbourne's abandoned child to Auckland's missing woman. On 16th September, at 3:20 p.m., New Zealand police conducted a welfare check at the Torbay Street residence after Annie's relatives became concerned. The check was authorised under a standard welfare provision. Sergeant Mark Casey, responding officer, noted in his log that the house was locked, mail had accumulated, and a faint odour was detected near the car parked in the driveway. Casey conducted a limited interior sweep. No forced entry, no signs of struggle visible from accessible windows. A telecom technician, assisting police, confirmed Annie's phone had not pinged off any tower since 11th September, a full 5 days of digital silence. Unable to locate either occupant, and noting the suspicious circumstances, Casey escalated the case to the Criminal Investigation Branch. The combination of prolonged absence, accumulated mail, and the unexplained odour near the vehicle elevated the welfare check to a potential criminal matter. Physical absence of mother and child increased the likelihood of foul play. A second search was approved, expanding the scope to include the property's vehicles, a decision that would transform a routine welfare check into a homicide investigation within hours. At 6:44 p.m. on 16th September, a second search team led by Detective Sergeant Steve Wood returned to the residence. Wood later wrote in his investigative log, vehicle odor stronger, boot warm to the touch. After securing a rapid judicial authorization, officers opened the trunk of the Honda. Inside, wrapped in blankets, later labeled Exhibits A1A4, lay the body of Annie Liu. Forensic Officer Sarah Young documented ligature marks and immediate indicators of manual strangulation. The scene perimeter was expanded, and the residence was formally designated a homicide scene. At 7:52 p.m., cross-border liaison with Victoria Police confirmed a potential match: a child abandoned in Melbourne with Chinese heritage and no identified guardians. Immigration records showed that Yin Xue had departed Auckland on 14th of September, 3 days after Annie was last seen alive, and had arrived in Melbourne that same day. The child found at Southern Cross Station was confirmed as his daughter through documentation provided by New Zealand authorities. The discovery established homicide and connected events across 2 countries. Detectives now needed to locate Xue, last seen with his daughter, and now a suspect in his wife's death. After the discovery of Annie's body, investigators began reconstructing Xue's movements with urgency. Immigration New Zealand provided passport scan records confirming that at 1:25 p.m. on 14th September 2007, we departed Auckland on Air New Zealand flight NZ3 bound for Melbourne. He was travelling alone. There was no accompanying child listed on the manifest. The record of his departure gate scan, logged at Gate 5 at 12:58 p.m., further narrowed the timeline. At the same time, Telecom's metadata analysis indicated Xue's mobile phone ceased activity at 9:32 a.m. on 11 September, corroborating the neighbour's sighting earlier that morning. The absence of phone use in the days following Annie's murder suggested an attempt to reduce digital traceability. Meanwhile, Australian Federal Police cross-referenced CCTV footage from Melbourne Airport. At 3:47 p.m., Xue is seen walking through the baggage claim area, carrying a single suitcase. The next confirmed sighting was the Southern Cross Station footage 2 days later, Xue with Pumpkin. Investigators quickly determined he had remained in Melbourne only long enough to abandon his daughter before leaving the country. Travel, phone, and surveillance records aligned to show intentional concealment and rapid flight. With Xue no longer in Australia, international agencies initiated coordinated monitoring of outbound passenger lists. Following the homicide designation, Annie's body was transported to the Auckland City Hospital mortuary, where forensic pathologist Dr. Martin Sage conducted the autopsy under case reference 07-2451. The examination took place between 17 and 18th of September. The autopsy confirmed manual strangulation as the cause of death, with evidence of petechial hemorrhaging and soft tissue bruising, consistent with force applied to the neck. Dr. Sage estimated the time of death to be on or near the morning of 11 September, aligning with the moment Xue was last seen at the residence. Wounds indicated no defensive injuries, suggesting Annie may have been attacked suddenly or from behind. Toxicology showed no substances in her system. Crime scene technicians also recovered fiber samples from the blankets used to wrap her body. These were consistent with textiles found inside the home's spare bedroom, another point linking the crime to the residence rather than an external party. The fibers, combined with the autopsy's timeline, placed Xue at the scene during the window of Annie's death. Autopsy timing placed Xue at the scene during Annie's death window. Results provided legal grounds for issuing an international arrest warrant, a step that would transform the case from a domestic investigation into a coordinated international manhunt. Detective Constable Michael Renata, assigned to digital forensics, initiated analysis of Xue's phone, ATM use, and online activity. Telecom provided tower connection data showing Xue's phone dropped offline minutes after 9:32 a.m. On 11 September, this corroborated statements that Annie was unreachable shortly afterward. Banking records from ANZ showed an ATM withdrawal of NZD $200 at 10:22 a.m., less than an hour after Annie's likely time of death. The transaction occurred at a machine on Stoddard Road, 1.4 kilometers from the residence. Investigators interpreted this as early movement aimed at travel preparation. Records indicated no further withdrawals until 15 September in Melbourne, when Xue withdrew AUD $100 near Spencer Street. Searches through his online accounts revealed no communication attempts, email activity, or bookings beyond the initial flight. Instead, gaps in digital behavior suggested intentional suppression of traceable activity. The financial record showed purposeful movement, withdrawing cash for immediate needs while avoiding credit transactions that would create detailed location trails. Digital silence contrasted with financial movement, indicating deliberate operational steps toward escape. Investigators forwarded all financial and digital data to Interpol to help identify Xue's next likely destination, recognizing that his pattern suggested premeditated flight rather than impulsive departure. On 19 September, the New Zealand Police International Liaison Office issued an urgent request to Interpol to circulate a red notice for the arrest of Yin Xue on suspicion of murder and child abandonment. The notice included passport details, biometric data, and the most recent verified images, including the Southern Cross Station footage. That same day, U.S. authorities confirmed that Xue had arrived in Los Angeles on 15 September, boarding United Airlines flight UA840 from Melbourne. His immigration entry record showed he entered on a visitor visa with no listed onward travel, a common entry pattern that provided few investigative leads. Interpol forwarded the red notice to U.S. federal agencies, including the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and the Department of Homeland Security. The case was prioritized due to the violent nature of the alleged offense and the involvement of a vulnerable child. Alerts were distributed to field offices across major metropolitan areas, particularly those with significant Chinese or Chinese New Zealand communities where Xue might seek anonymity. With Xue confirmed inside the United States, the manhunt expanded to one of the world's largest law enforcement jurisdictions. Alerts were issued to local police departments across multiple states, focusing on cities with established immigrant communities where a fugitive might blend into daily life unnoticed. Throughout October 2007, U.S. law enforcement received multiple tips from the public after major media outlets circulated Xue's image. The FBI recorded sightings in Los Angeles, Dallas, and Houston, though none yielded immediate action. Investigators noted Xue's pattern of traveling among cities with significant Chinese communities, likely seeking anonymity within familiar cultural and linguistic environments. On 9 October 2007, a credible sighting occurred in Chamblee, Georgia, where a witness, identified in FBI notes as Mr. Li Wei, reported seeing a man resembling Xue in a local store. Agents canvassed the area but did not locate him. Over the following months, Xue moved through several states, as confirmed by intermittent public reports and limited security footage, including one verified image from a convenience store in Doraville, Georgia, time-stamped 15th January 2008 at 9:03 p.m. The footage showed a thin, unshaven man buying instant noodles. The turning point came when members of the Chinese community in Chamblee recognized him again in early February 2008. According to statements later filed in Georgia, bystanders confronted him, and during the altercation, he began shouting in Mandarin, pleading to be let go. Bystanders held him until DeKalb County Police arrived. The arrest report filed at 4:12 p.m. on 8th of February 2008, confirmed his identity through fingerprints cross-checked with FBI IFIS and Interpol's Red Notice. The fugitive was not captured through surveillance or border enforcement, but through sustained public vigilance. Following his arrest, Xue was transferred to DeKalb County Jail, where he appeared before a federal magistrate judge regarding extradition. The New Zealand police provided certified documentation of the charges, including the autopsy report, crime scene analysis, and CCTV evidence. According to U.S. court records, Xue did not contest extradition. On 27th of June 2008, he was returned to Auckland under escort. The arrival log at Auckland International Airport marked his entry at 5:14 a.m. He was transported directly to Mount Eden Prison, pending trial. Meanwhile, arrangements were being made for Pumpkin's long-term care. After intervention by both Australian and New Zealand child welfare agencies, she was reunited with extended family in China. Statements from Child Protection Services later reflected the emotional impact of the case, though details were kept sealed to protect her privacy. Extradition marked the transition from an international manhunt to a domestic homicide prosecution, a shift that would allow New Zealand courts to determine Xue's culpability based on the documented evidence accumulated across 3 countries. Xue's trial began in February 2009 at the Auckland High Court, presided over by Justice Hugh Williams. The Crown presented evidence that chronicled the timeline from Annie's last known movements to Xue's departure from New Zealand. Key evidence included the autopsy establishing strangulation, fibre matches between blankets and interior furnishings, CCTV from Southern Cross Station showing child abandonment, passport and travel data, witness testimony from neighbors and co-workers, and financial and phone metadata showing activity consistent with rapid flight. During the trial, Xue declined to testify. His counsel argued alternate timelines were possible. However, the Crown emphasized the unbroken chain connecting Xue to each critical event, from the neighbor's sighting on the morning of 11 September through the documented flight path and final arrest in Georgia. On 8 July 2009, after deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of murdering Annie Liu. Xue was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum non-parole period of 12 years. The sentencing notes remarked on the calculated and deliberate nature of the acts following the homicide. Public reaction in both New Zealand and Australia reflected a sense of closure, but also enduring concern for Pumpkin's well-being. The court acknowledged these impacts, but maintained focus on the documented evidence that had connected 3 countries, multiple law enforcement agencies, and hundreds of investigative hours into a single prosecutable case. The conviction resolved the criminal inquiry, though Xue's refusal to testify left key questions about motive unanswered, questions that would remain in the permanent case file without resolution. At 4:33 p.m., the security footage from Southern Cross Station shows a man setting down a small backpack beside a steel bench. The backpack, later catalogued as Exhibit PX0714, rests unchanged in each frame. When investigators reviewed the footage weeks later, they noted the precise moment the man turned away without hesitation. It was the same minute Annie Liu's body, still unidentified to Australian authorities at the time, lay concealed in a parked Honda in Auckland. Across cities, borders, and time zones, the backpack remained the fixed point, linking a child abandoned in Melbourne to a homicide in Mount Roskill, an object whose presence on a station bench quietly anchored the timeline of an international manhunt.